The echo of my footsteps reverberated through the empty corridors of the Palace of Versailles. It was midnight, and as the new night curator, I was tasked with doing the final rounds before closing. The flickering candlelight cast dancing shadows on the gilded walls, creating an ethereal and unsettling atmosphere. As I walked through the sumptuous halls, I couldn't shake the shiver that ran down my spine. The air was heavy, laden with the scent of wilted roses and a hint of mildew. My eyes wandered over the imposing portraits hanging on the walls, their stern expressions seeming to follow me with every step. Suddenly, a subtle noise caught my attention. It seemed to come from the famous Hall of Mirrors. I hesitated for a moment, my heart quickening. The stories the older staff told about that particular place echoed in my mind. I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself. "They're just legends," I murmured to myself, though my voice trembled slightly. As I entered the hall, I was immediately enveloped by an intense cold. My breath formed small clouds in the air, something unusual for a summer night. The hundreds of mirrors adorning the walls seemed to absorb the scant light coming through the windows, creating a sinister play of reflections and shadows. I walked slowly through the hall, my eyes keenly scanning for any movement. It was then that I noticed something strange in one of the mirrors. For a moment, I thought I saw a female figure dressed in an elaborate 18th century gown. I blinked quickly, and the image disappeared. "It must be fatigue," I thought, rubbing my eyes. I continued my inspection, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and I could swear I heard distant whispers, as if an invisible crowd was conversing in low voices all around me. Suddenly, the sharp sound of shattering glass echoed through the hall. I spun around quickly, my heart nearly leaping out of my chest. One of the mirrors was cracked, a thin line snaking across its surface. I cautiously approached, my flashlight trembling in my hand. As I examined the mirror more closely, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. Reflected in the cracked surface was not my face, but that of a woman. Her eyes were deep and sad, her pale face framed by an elaborate hairstyle. I recognized her instantly from the portraits scattered throughout the palace. Marie Antoinette. I took a step back, my mind struggling to process what I was seeing. The image in the mirror smiled sadly, her lips moving as if she wanted to speak. No sound came out, but somehow I could understand her words in my mind. "Welcome to our world." At that moment, all the mirrors in the hall began to vibrate subtly. Reflections of historical figures appeared in each one. Louis XIV, Madame de Pompadour, Cardinal Richelieu. Their expressions ranged from melancholy to anger, their eyes fixed on me. I tried to run, but my feet seemed glued to the floor. The air grew even colder, and I could see my own breath heaving. The figures in the mirrors began to move, their reflections stepping out of the gilded frames as if made of mist. Marie Antoinette was the first to fully emerge. She floated toward me, her gown billowing without wind. Her pale, translucent hand reached out to touch my face. I felt an intense cold where her ghostly fingers brushed against my skin. "For centuries, we've been trapped here," her voice echoed in my mind. "Now, you will be our connection to the world of the living." Other figures began to emerge from the mirrors, filling the hall with their ethereal forms. Courtesans in sumptuous dresses, nobles in elaborate attire, servants in simple clothes. Every stratum of French court society seemed represented in this strange supernatural gathering. Louis XIV approached, his presence imposing even in spectral form. "Every night, we relive our glory and our fall," he said, his voice reverberating off the walls. "And now, you will witness our eternal story." I tried to speak, but my voice failed me. Fear paralyzed my muscles, and I could only watch as the hall transformed before my eyes. The gilded walls came alive with scenes of luxurious balls, palace intrigues, and pivotal moments in French history. I saw Marie Antoinette in her final moments before execution, her face a mask of dignity and fear. I witnessed the secret negotiations of Louis XIV, the Sun King, as he manipulated European politics. I observed the intimate moments and scandals that history books never mention. The scenes changed rapidly, like a kaleidoscope of memories and emotions. Laughter, screams, whispers, and music blended into a ghostly cacophony. I wanted to close my eyes, to escape this supernatural spectacle, but something compelled me to keep watching. Amid the visions, I noticed a recurring pattern. Each historical figure seemed trapped in a cycle of their greatest triumphs and their worst downfalls. It was as if the Hall of Mirrors was a purgatory, forcing them to eternally relive their victories and tragedies. Madame de Pompadour approached, her face a mix of charm and melancholy. "See how power and beauty are fleeting," she whispered. "We are trapped here, reliving our lives, unable to change our fates." The hours seemed to drag on as I was forced to witness centuries of history unfolding before my eyes. I saw wars being declared with a single stroke of a pen, forbidden loves blossoming in the palace's dark corners, and conspiracies being plotted in seemingly innocent gardens. When the first rays of morning sunlight finally penetrated the hall's windows, the figures began to slowly dissipate, reluctantly returning to their mirrors. Marie Antoinette was the last to leave, her eyes meeting mine one last time. "Come back to us," she silently implored. "We are the forgotten memories of Versailles. Without witnesses, we will cease to exist." With those words, she vanished, and I found myself alone in the Hall of Mirrors. The early morning light made the chandelier crystals sparkle, casting colorful reflections on the walls. Everything seemed normal, as if the surreal night I had just experienced hadn't happened. Trembling, I left the hall and made my way through the now brightly lit palace corridors. I found my daytime replacement at the main entrance, his face creased with concern at my pale and disheveled appearance. "Are you all right?" he asked. "You look like you've seen a ghost." I almost laughed at the irony. "You have no idea," I murmured, handing him the keys with trembling hands. In the days that followed, I tried to convince myself that it had all been a vivid dream, a hallucination brought on by fatigue and the stories I'd heard. But every time I passed the Hall of Mirrors during the day, I could swear I saw familiar faces watching me in the reflections, their eyes pleading for my return. At night, in my dreams, I revisited the hall. The voices of the ghosts of Versailles echoed in my mind, telling their stories, revealing secrets long buried by time. I would wake up in a cold sweat, the images of their lives and deaths still vivid in my memory. I considered quitting my job, fleeing from the haunting memories that now inhabited my mind. But something held me back. Perhaps it was curiosity, or perhaps a sense of duty to those souls trapped in the limbo of history. A week after that fateful night, I found myself once again standing before the Hall of Mirrors at midnight. My hand trembled as I turned the doorknob. Part of me expected and feared that it would all happen again. As I entered the hall, I was greeted by the same supernatural cold. The mirrors began to vibrate softly, and I saw the familiar faces emerging from the reflective surfaces. Marie Antoinette smiled, extending her ethereal hand toward me. "You've returned?" Her voice echoed in my mind, a mixture of relief and sorrow. I swallowed hard, gathering the courage to speak. "Yes," I replied, my voice barely a whisper. "I think I have some stories to hear." And so, night after night, I became the reluctant guardian of Versailles secrets. Each visit to the Hall of Mirrors was a journey through the centuries, a history lesson that no book could offer. I learned about the joys and sorrows, the triumphs and failures of those who once walked the palace's gilded halls. Sometimes, I wondered if I was losing my sanity. Other times, I felt privileged to be the only one who knew the true stories behind the legends. But always, as I left the hall in the early hours of the morning, I carried with me the weight of centuries of secrets and the knowledge that, as long as I lived, the memories of Versailles would remain alive. The Palace of Versailles, with all its grandeur and opulence, hid more than just material treasures. In its mirrors, it held the restless souls of a bygone era, trapped between glory and tragedy, waiting for someone who could hear their stories and, perhaps one day, free them from their eternal cycle of memories. And I, a simple night curator, had become the link between two worlds, walking the thin line between reality and the supernatural, always wondering if the next night would be the last in which Versailles mirrors revealed their secrets.